Hello and welcome to Community Builders, the podcast where we talk about doing the work it takes to build a thriving community. I'm here today with my guest, Cathryn Carkhuff of Home and Heart.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all these plants.
Well,
it really is amazing in here.
Thank you. I'm very particular to plants. Tell me about Home and Heart.
Well, we are coming up onto our 5th year anniversary. And I think Home and Heart's start is one of my favorite parts about it and why it really drew me to the organization. So a little bit of background about me. I have a bachelor's of social work, and then I got a master's in human rights education, basically. And social work for me, I went to Temple University, and it was this really amazing place. I'd always kind of known I wanted to be a social worker because my older sister was, but when I got to school, I feel like it was just really transformative for me. And our program actually started out with a professor in the social work department at Chico State, Sue Steiner, and 2 of her interns, one of which, Sierra Schmidt, who actually ended up leaving her master's degree program to run the organization. And so I think that really hits at the power of college and academia, of this like space to really think about issues that we have in our society and, innovate and really kind of try to solve problems. And so I have just always thought it was the coolest thing that Sierra was able to build this with her professor in this program, and then actually graduate to it being her job.
Awesome. And so tell me about it. It's a service for both home providers and home seekers. Is that right?
Yeah. So we basically, and that's the exact terminology. So we have home providers who are usually older adults, but not always. We have a lot of people that are just like believe in affordable housing and love what we do, and so they come to us. But a home provider would be someone who has an extra bedroom in their home and is willing to either rent it out for affordably or have some kind of mixed or service arrangement. And a home seeker is someone who's looking for affordable housing that is willing to help an older adult age in place or meet one of these kind of service agreements. And so we have 3 different options. Like I said, there's the rent only. People can also do a service exchange, which would look like maybe there's an older adult and, they need help with transportation. They need help getting their groceries every week. They need help changing light bulbs at home. It's a pretty constant, there's some hours on a daily basis. And then they could basically say, instead of paying rent, I'd actually love to have this person live with me, and just this is the services that we're exchanging instead of rent. And then what we actually have is a lot of people that want a little bit of both. And so many older adults, their issue for staying in their homes is actually they need more money because everything has gone up. And so they want a little bit of money, and they also need a little bit of services. So something like that might look like, $300 or $400 a month in rent and trips to doctor's visits or things like that. And we aren't a hands-on caregiving program because we are not nurses and we're not hiring, nurses, and our home seekers aren't nurses. But we kind of anything custodial, outside of that. And so a really good gauge that I like to say is someone can remind people about medications on a daily basis, but they can't actually physically give them medications and things like that. So,
well, that's excellent. I haven't known about this until now, so I feel like I have about 1 million questions, but I want to pull on a thread of something you mentioned earlier, that you always knew you wanted to do social work. Mm-hmm. Why and how and what? When you say always, were you in kindergarten, they were what do you want to be when you grow up? And you were I want to do social work. Or what led to that?
Well, I was actually just talking with my sister about this. My sister is quite older than me. I may have been the accident of 4 children. And so there's about a 10-year age gap between us. So she was the first to leave the house, and she went to school for social work. And she's always kind of guided me in my life. I've always kind of looked at her as oh, this is someone that I can I can follow, or this is someone who represents for various reasons, like my family like had some, issues, but like she was always kind of like this guiding light for me of like, oh, I think she's doing it the right way. Yeah. And so she went to school for social work, and I used to read her books. Like, I was so interested in what she was doing, and like she described it to me as basically just helping people, and I was like, well, that's what I want to do. And I remember very famously, like one of the first times I stood up to my dad, he was like talking about how I should be a lawyer because I like to argue. And I was like very firm. I think I was like 13. I was like, no, I'm going to be a social worker. Like, because, he of course wanted me to make money. And still to this day, I kind of protest that and am still in social work. But yeah, no, I think the more I learned about it, the more variety I like realized like it really is just this giant scope, and you can work in, you can work in fields, and you can work in counties, and you can work in like these big industries, or you can also do like a very grassroots approach. And I think when I went to college at Temple University, I gravitated towards all the professors that were like not just going to work at Child Protective Services. There's like a very clinical side of social work, and then there's a very like community side of social work. And I found myself gravitating towards all of the professors that were definitely on like the more macro, like there are systemic issues that are the reason that people are struggling, and we need to explore these, and we need to like less work in institutions and more work in communities to try and help. And so I think I took that approach.
That's an interesting dichotomy, the institutions versus the community. What might be some examples of like institutional, like I know you mentioned CPS, and you feel like maybe that's not appealing to you. Can you tell me a little more about why?
Well, I mean, I think everything has its place, right? And at the end of the day, I think you actually need everything. And so, I'm not trying to sit here and say that like all of our issues aren't going to be solved by like, there's plenty of good people in, county positions, in, all different kinds of institutionalized positions. But it, like anything, it moves a lot slower. Like I used to work at the university, and like, as much as I felt like as a student, this was like this place of innovation, of like dreaming big and like thinking of new ways and innovative ways to solve issues, it has a bureaucracy. And so it means actually that like that's a barrier to like getting those things done. It takes a professor like Sue Steiner, it takes a motivated student. And then that was actually built outside of the university in community. And so I think in community work, you often have less money and less security and less stability. But what you do have is this ability to be more direct in your approach to helping community, and more nimble, really. So like anything goes, but you have to fund it, right? Like you can do anything you want, but you have to do all the work. So like it's, and for me, I've found that I actually prefer that. I feel like at my age, I know the work that I want to do in the world, and I kind of know the things that I gravitate towards. And so I'd rather just like organize volunteers to help me, like, raise money to fund it, than to, kind of just be in a system.
Sure. And so that's interesting to me, because I think a lot of people say, if the calculation is less money and more directly involved in the community, I'm going to choose the more money way. What is it about you that said, I'd rather have a direct relationship with the community?
Well, I mean, I have to acknowledge that it's privilege. Like my sister, for example, is a single mom, and she doesn't, she's in the institutional route, and I totally get it. And so I'm in a partnership, and my partner does web stuff. And that is something in this society that is like highly rewarded. And so even though we have a kid and we have a mortgage, like I can take the financial risk of doing community work. And that's not everyone's reality. And so I think there is a bit of privilege in that I do just want to acknowledge. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm actually forgetting your question.
No. Why is the appeal to you more community connection than money.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking about this earlier. I think there are people that run, I mean, if you go to therapy, they will talk about like conflict avoidance and moving to and away from conflict. And I have always been someone who is like, moves towards the difficult things in life. And I think really it comes down to a need to be like honest about the world around us and to really find the truth of things and like go to the root. Like Angela Davis always talks about like going to the root of an issue. And to me, like a lot of my journey was like knowing that that's people that are actually out there struggling and suffering. Like that's the root of everything. And so you can't fix any issues unless you're talking and working directly and understanding those folks in their lives and what they go through.
Do you think that if more people were in a position of privilege, more people would gravitate towards these things? Or do you think that there's an element that some people just aren't interested in helping or being directly connected to a community?
I mean, I think we all have a need for belonging and a need for connection. And I mean, I'm an extrovert, so I have more of a need for that. So I don't know if introverts are really drawn towards community work. But I mean, I think that, that sense of belonging and connection are human needs. And so we gotta find it one way or another. For me, I think I just see it as the solution to most of the issues in society is like coming together and understanding what it's like for other people. And so I guess if you didn't think that that was the solution, then maybe you wouldn't be drawn towards that. I don't know. I mean, I'm 40. I tend to like speculate less about what other people should or could do because I feel like that can get complicated. But yeah.
That's funny. I want to go back to the institutions versus like direct community stuff. And what's the path forward for that? And how do we, one, make, community-driven nonprofit or social work better paid for the people who are doing that? Mm-hmm. And on the other side of that, how do we make the institutional side more human? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I feel like that's a very big question for maybe someone who's running for political office, and I'm not. But I can give you kind of my 2 cents on it. I really do think we need everything. And I think it's really about being honest about, like, in community work, sometimes you're working with other people who have more access to resources than you do. And so I think it's not that those folks shouldn't work together. It's just that there should be honest conversations and acknowledgement about power. And I think if folks that are bringing more resources to the table can realize, like, my personal view is that in capitalism, like, how much you make is arbitrary. So if people have more resources, it's not because they've worked harder. It's just because for any number of reasons or privileges, they have better access to them. And so I think, if folks can work together, like when I've been able to work in community with institutions, it's been like, oh, well, you're with an institution, so you have these limitations, but you also have this access and these strengths. And like, we're in the community, so we have these limitations, but we also have these. And when you can just kind of come to the table, and it's actually what makes home sharing work again. See that full circle? Is like the home sharing where people realize, like, are transparent about the power dynamics and the mutual benefit, and are able to both see that, like, they have things to offer and they have things that they can, they need to receive. It works out better. And I think it's when you scale that up to like a more macro level, it's the same thing. Like if institutions can be honest about, their limitations and their resources, and work with community in a way that they're honest about communities, like community-based organizations, resources, and strengths, I think we could, that could be the way forward. I think egos and power get in the way of all of that.
Do you think that's a symptom of the system, or is that a symptom of the human condition?
I don't know. I don't want to say all one. I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Do you believe in free will?
Ooh. I would have to say yes, because I went on a camping trip one time with someone and their argument was that there is no free will. And I was so perplexed and angry. I mean, I did give it honest thought and, conversation and in my head, but I think it goes back to hope, like I think for me, I've spent my whole life actually working with young people. So Home and Heart has been like quite a shift to older adults, but this is actually the same no matter what. But I think like, especially in these times, I think it like absence of free will, it's hard for me to find out like, or to put my hands on. And maybe I just haven't gotten there in my own journey, but it's hard for me to put my hands on like how we have hope and give hope to others.
I really like that. Is that something you feel clearly is something you do, right? Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how we can get more of that and bring more hope to others.
That's a good question. I feel like you have all these questions for me as if I'm some kind of like Buddha.
No,
but they are good questions. I just don't know the answers.
I'm just more trying to get at why you are a person that runs towards the crisis, right? Runs towards that, because I think for a lot of people that part is the perplexing part, right? Is it's like, well, like, a disaster or like a breakdown of a social system, I'm going the other way.
Right. Like, right? I'll just kill myself. Yeah. And like when the apocalypse comes,
sure,
like, I'm not
right.
going to try.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but clearly something deviated there with you. And so maybe we go back to, do you feel like you're from a family of helpers? Do you feel like this is in spite of a family that didn't want you to do this? Is that, where did it, and I know you already talked about your sister a little bit. Do you think that there are other factors that contributed to you wanting to do these things?
Yeah, well, without this turning into a therapy session, I feel like my family is actually kind of split, like politically and along those very same lines.
I think that's true for a lot of families right now.
Yeah. So my mom was a nurse her whole life. My mom is definitely a helper. My mom definitely runs towards, people in crisis and, tries to help and has always been that way. And my sister is, definitely like that too. And I consider myself like that. My brother, there's 4 kids in my family. My dad, was not really like that. I joke that like in another life I could do stand up about like my dad's attempts and failures at being a con artist without actually ever like having that be like he has kind of these like hilarious con artist attempts that fail miserably. And I would, in another world, I would love to do a stand up episode on it.
I would like to listen to that. It sounds funny.
But yeah, I think he was trying to like he was like understood the system and he was trying to use it with whatever kind of he had. And I think a lot of that came from his own father, who very much ruled with like an iron fist that like, if you aren't a successful rich man, like what are you? And I think there's a lot of toxic masculinity in that too. But I think that, kind of guided how he went. And then, my other siblings are not people that run towards things, and they have jobs in big institutions in sales, and so it is kind of interesting to like look at the dynamics in my own family, that like half of us split, we really split. Half of us went kind of the helper route and the other half didn't. I mean, I think like to say that someone is, I'm not trying to say that someone in sales is not helping people. I think people find ways to help in their life every day. Like my partner, for example, is like, he's in web services, but like what that man does for his family and his community is like so helpful. So not everyone has like a position where they're helping people, but like in their personal life, they're like very committed to like community and helping people. And so I also just want to make that distinction, because I don't think it's just people that do helping professions for their jobs that are helpful. I think like a lot of people keep what they do separate from how they help.
Yeah. I think that's That's very gracious, and that's, I think, real, right? People, you have to kind of meet them where they are, and they help in different ways. And some people's main mode is like a donation at the end of the year, and maybe, that's where they're at.
Right.
I like exploring a little bit of like, what is the average person's obligation to be a helper? And at what point do you say, like, Dad, you're not doing enough? Or is that ever a conversation you have? I know am affected when I see unhoused people, and like, I feel a compassion and like a fear surrounding that. I also am, a business person and understands that like that can be affected as well. What do we tell people? How do we frame that conversation of like, there's this huge crisis right now, and clearly it has to be talked about, right? That's like one of the first steps, but how do we do it in like an effective and compassionate way? And how do you talk to someone who maybe doesn't feel the same level of, I should run towards this?
Yeah. Well, I think I had a lot of different approaches depending on what age I was in my own family.
Yeah, cool.
When I was 20s and had just gone to college and felt like all of the things I was like feeling on such a deep level, where now I had like language for them. Like I was very emboldened, and like I was protesting, like taking over bridges and, telling my family mouthfuls about what they should or shouldn't do. And I would say that maybe hasn't changed entirely. I still consider myself like someone who tells it like it is. But I think I found like, you're not going to change people's minds. I mean, I think if this election has taught us anything, like, no matter what tactics we had with our family members, like we're still in a dead heat on this election, And so like, I mean, I think a lot of us have gone through this very on a micro and a macro level of like, and I think like now I have to like kind of accept that I'm not going to change someone's mind, because I mean, I think when you go into a conversation with someone, it's very obvious that like people can tell that you're trying to change their mind. As clever and persuasive as I can be, like that agenda is very clear, and I don't think it goes over well, and I think it doesn't ever actually work, or I haven't found a way to make it work. I think the thing that I've always tried to do with my family is like, I would hear my dad say things and I'd be like, well, let me tell you about this woman that I'm working with, right? Is to just share those stories, because it really is like, wealth has such this way of like dividing us that we live in like totally different worlds. And now with, media and politics, that can happen in many ways. But I think I saw it the most, like there are people that don't ever want to go into, across the street and like find connection with the folks over here. And I think there are some people that feel like they have things to learn from that. And so knowing if you're talking to someone who is like never going to physically put themselves with someone who is like struggling or someone who is in crisis, then like, how can I share their stories with those folks? And I feel like that's kind of maybe the most successful I've been, but again, it never changed anyone's mind,
Yeah, that's so interesting. So in a world where you can't change minds, which is, like you said, kind of maybe more and more coming to light that that's the case, how does that affect your motivation? Do you think it amplifies it? Does it diminish it? Does it make you feel like, well, if these folks aren't going to help or change their minds, I'm going to work twice as hard? Or is it the opposite? Is it like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought getting into it, and I need to slow my roll so I don't burn myself out or die, trying to do this?
Yeah. Once again, kind of like 2 decades in this work, I feel like there's been a lot of different things.
Yeah, but that's what gives you the perspective to,
right.
to weigh in on this stuff.
Right. And I think that's why folks like tend to like, I stick with around people that like believe the things that I believe in because I don't have like the nonprofit world, social work, like you don't have the resources. So like you kind of have to pull together. And so, I think what it ends up leading to is like people kind of segregating into camps, which probably, isn't helpful. When it comes to burnout, I feel like that's a whole, like that's half of going to school for social work. It's like, it was when I went to school in the aughts, and it, I think still is because like how do you, as your job, day in and day out, go into people's crises and like not burn out? It's a really difficult thing. And so I think it's still probably half, if not more, of most social work departments in college. But I think when you're like, when I was young, I wanted, I did just like immerse myself completely into it. Like, I worked for this tiny nonprofit in North Philly, and I would have done anything for that nonprofit. I did. Like, we lost, United Way pulled out funding one year, which was like to the tune of $350,000. And like, was the majority of their budget. And so like we had to cut programs. Like I lost health benefits. I had just gotten them and then lost them. I got my hours cut, and I didn't even care because like, that community was so important to me, and that like that work was so important to me that like I probably would have done it for free. But again, I had the ability because like I was only paying like $350 a month in rent, which sounds crazy now. And I wasn't taking care of my mom. I wasn't taking care of a kid. Like I wasn't doing all of those things. And so, I think that's kind of changed where like when you're middle-aged and you are kind of taking care of an older and a younger generation, you don't have the energy to like give it everything you have at work and then go home and still give and still, I think I had to, kind of pivot in the work that I wanted to do, which I think just kind of really leads to like having personal and like organizational boundaries, which are not a bad thing. But yeah, so I think I've been on like a lot of different stages of burnout. And it's one of those things I often tell people, like, it's not like you ever actually get it. It's like solving any like social issue. It's like, are we ever going to live in a world without racism? Like, I don't actually know, but like, why? Like, you have to just try. Like, every day you have to try. And like, you have to, find like what works for you on like a daily basis. And I feel like burnout and social work, which is like rife for burnout, is kind of the same deal. It's like, are you ever not going to get overwhelmed and have perfect boundaries? No. But like, when you get better at being like, I probably should have done that differently, or like, I probably should have, like not taken that on, or like I could have handled this better. And so I think over time, you get better at that, because I think the people in social work are the people that are really bad at saying no. And so you have to kind of learn how to make that work for you as you get older and have kids and take care of parents and things like that.
Has it gotten better or worse since you were able to do this and pay $350 for rent and dedicate so much effort? Like, I'm worried about who's the young you doing that right now and is paying $1,500 for rent,
right,
and is burning out faster.
Right.
And I guess maybe where I'm going with that is, what's at stake here? Mm-hmm. What do we lose as a society if we can't let people throw themselves into something the way you were able to? And why is it important to support that?
So I've like I said, I've worked with teens my whole life, and I was actually at CAVE, and feeling climate change and like the political climate and just like all of these big issues, and like wondering, like, I mean, I graduated in recession, and it was like billed as like, oh, this is awful. And it's like, so I had like a lot of empathy for like, what is it actually like to graduate now, right? And like because CAVE is all people, it's like volunteering in the community. So it's all the people that want to help. And it's funny because they always come in, thinking they want to do one thing, and then they end up like wanting to go into nonprofits. Like it's like we create a pipeline. But they're like, and I think when I was at Cave, it's like for a lot of young people, they had never been on a team where like everyone's working for like the good of the community. And that was so transformative for them. Almost in this way that it's like, oh, like this is what the working world is like. And then they got jobs and are like, oh, wait, no, this is not what, and but I think my message to them is like the same message I have for anyone, which is like, we live in really uncertain times, and the most important, like using Cave as this microcosm, surround yourself with people that like want to do the good that you want to do in the world, like create that community, because in college it's very easy to find it. And then the thing that you have to do after college is like create it yourself. You have to nurture those relationships. And when you have kids and when you're like, life pulls you in all these different directions, you have to continue to like build that community. Like community is everything. And so I think a lot of my advice to them was like, you might have to build it. Like I left that job so that I could build my own nonprofit, right? And I remember like feeling like I was, you're always going to miss the students the most, but like I also felt like it was really important to show them that like sometimes you get to a point where like you have to build it yourself. And I feel like it's very true of Chico in general. It's like a very Chico thing, because like in the Bay Area, like I feel like the Bay Area has just done, and I got to see it firsthand and it was really beautiful. Like the reason Oakland is the way it is as far as its like political consciousness and like its ability to like rise up to community issues is because elders have put that into younger generations. They have like an informal schooling that has been a part of values that have been passed down, knowledge that has been passed down. And, I think we don't have that in Chico because of that. Like that's very unique to Oakland because it's the birthplace of the Black Panthers, and it's just had this like revolutionary spirit for so long, and they've done. It's not without work. It's been work to pass that down to each generation, and I think you really have to do that in a community. And I look at Chico as this place where like, yeah, you could do something, but you have to build it. Like the infrastructure isn't there. Like in the Bay Area, I feel like you can just tap into things, right, and help and support. And there's a lot of potential here in Chico. I think the size of Chico is like brilliant because there are people that will follow you. Like there are people that will support you, but you just have to build it yourself. And so I think it's like the same message to young people who are like graduating now and wondering, gosh, what they do in this world, and I think for some people, like, the folks that like really want that connection and want that meaning in their work, it really just is about like, sometimes you have to build it. Like, even if you're in an institution, how can you build it in that institution? If you're teaching in a classroom, how can you make your classroom that community? Like, you can do it, you just have to build it. And so that's why it's really important to surround yourself with people that like are your professors after college, like put yourself in a community of people that are going to like be able to hear how like, you should have done something different in your classroom that day, or like, whatever it is that are going to be that sounding board. And, I feel I wouldn't be anything without that community of people for me. And so I think that's like one of the most important pieces.
Yeah, that resonates with me, especially the aspects where you touched on listening to older or even just different generations. I think is something we're losing sight of. And I think that the other thing you touched on was simply exposure to people who are doing these things and how much that affected the teens you were working with, and how eye-opening that can be when you surround yourself with a certain group of people.
Yeah.
You become like that. That we've, again, like, I've lost a little bit of sight of. I think the pandemic, the political climate has not helped with that, and like coming together and being around other helpers. Where in Oakland did you live?
I lived in West Oakland. I lived in Temescal for a bit.
Okay. So, like West meaning like Mandela?
Yeah.
Okay, over by
16th
Brown
and
Sugar
Linden.
Kitchen? 60th, I'm on 60th and Market.
Like right now?
Yeah.
What?
But also in Chico here. Yeah, I lived there for 19 years.
Oh shit.
Yeah. No, that's okay. This is not a family podcast. Yeah. No, I spent a lot of time. I was. We probably crossed a lot of paths.
Yeah.
In there. Did you ever go to Rasa Cafe, over on the son of the Black Panther, who has his own coffee shop? It's pretty cool. Do you know? So in Temescal, like Gourmet Ghetto area, or like where
Well,
were you?
I was right off of Mosswood Park for quite a bit.
Oh, okay. Is that by Wood Street?
Oh my gosh, no. So like Mosswood Park is right by the hospital, and it's where they have like the Mosswood meltdowns.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's just like a giant park at like, I want to say right by MacArthur, so probably like 38th. This is like getting a long time ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
I know that area super well. Manifesto Bicycles and
Yes.
1234 Go Records.
Yes.
And
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I love Oakland. I love the Bay Area very much.
Yeah. So you can probably, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on my observation that like that is passed down from generation to generation, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting because there's still so much. I briefly was involved in like Dan Siegel's mayoral campaign and Kat Brooks. Do you know her?
I love Kat Brooks has been like, yeah, I mean, when I think about the people that like pass stuff down,
right,
like, I think that is the person that comes to my mind.
100%. Yeah, I think there's a lot of really positively influential elders in the Bay. Not to say it doesn't have its own, raft of issues and things. But yeah, and similarly, I think so I was also raised in Chico, so I went to like, Hooker Oak, Chico Junior, Chico High, Butte, Chico State, then went to Oakland and came back 19 years later. So I'm like kind of like I feel like I'm from Chico, but I also feel like the new guy in town a lot. And I definitely I click with this is a place I feel like I can make more of an impact. But there's also a lot of closed doors at the same time. And what are your goals being back here? What is your blue sky aspirational? What do you hope to see for this community?
Well, it's interesting that you say that you're from Oakland. I feel like I can kind of speak more to that. So, I mean, I'm from an area that's kind of suburbs outside of Philly. And so I moved to Philly as soon as I could because I was like, oof, this is I think I need other things, and loved Philly so much. And it was really working at that community-based organization that I was talking about before, North Square Neighborhood Project. They're amazing. They're still around. And talk about elders, putting values, really gently handing values into younger generations. They're that whole organization has that down, and it's a beautiful organization, and they're still around. You should totally check them out. But yeah, I mean, I think I learned there the power of transformative spaces, because I was working with high schoolers, and I was working with folks that would be getting out of school suspensions, and then lie about it so they could come to my program and write press releases. And I was like, what is this? Right? This is the power of community spaces. This is the power of ethnic studies. This is the power of I'm a firm believer that culture is a roadmap. And that's not my quote. That's from one of my idols, Jeff Duncan Andrade, who is also from Oakland. And I think it's this really interesting thing in education where that's why my master's degree work was actually on ethnic studies, because it's people need that, and there's other avenues to get it. You can get it from the church, you can get it from these other places, but I think it's it's unwise to say that a school can't be a place that where culture is practiced too. And it's I think it's almost irresponsible. So many communities that have like very warmly and without like they didn't need to like the community in Philly like really warmly embraced me as someone from the suburbs who didn't really like come with an understanding of what life was like for them. But you know, like I tried to have open eyes and ears, and they really like let me be a part of their culture, and it was like beautiful. And so I think from like I learned from that, but it was also like, how do I take this to like institutional spaces, right? Like how could school was never like this for me because I grew up in the suburbs, and it was like, you know, like there just wasn't a lot of culture around at all. But I was like, maybe if I can like go to grad school to like figure out more about what's going on here. And then, so that's what took me to USF. And then Precious Knowledge was a documentary that came out when I went to like a human rights film festival, and I saw it there, and I was like, I can't write about anything else because this is like giving validation to everything that I've just experienced. And it was heartbreaking that like these students had it named, they had it like, you know, they had these teachers that like institutionalized it into their school. It was like everything like I was trying to figure out. And it's like, oh, this is an example of people that like did it, and it was working, and it was closing graduation gaps and education gaps. And then it was made illegal. And so I was like, I can't write about anything else but this. So I think like, yeah, ethnic studies and like, but just this general idea of like, we have to put culture back into spaces and not sterilize spaces from culture, I think is something that still guides me. And, you know, in Chico, that's an interesting, like, it's different culture here than it is the Bay. So like, I stayed in San Francisco for a while. I worked, lived in Oakland, worked in San Francisco. And I think a lot of me coming here was like, you know what, like there's a lot of people like me in the Bay Area, like, and like you too. I don't know if you ever had this experience where it's like, I am like learning from people who are graciously letting me learn from them. But at what point, because I have the ability to understand the culture that I came from, at what point is it my work to take that back, right? It almost felt like, am I giving as much as I'm receiving in, you know, Oakland and Philly and all these places? And like, and so I wanted to come back, like, you know, we kind of like fell in love with Chico, and we had a kid and he can't pay rent. And so we needed to relocate. But I think the opportunity there for me was like, how do I take everything that I've learned and like, how do I translate it into here, where it's like very different cultures, where we have like, I mean, there's this really interesting conversation that I'm having about like, I think a lot of funders are like wanting to fund rural things because they're seeing that most of the money goes to the Bay Area, LA, San Diego, and very little funding goes out here from these like statewide organizations. And but there's also a push for equity, and so it's like this really interesting tension where like there's a want to fund more rural work, but like how does that relate to their equity goals? And I think it's a really interesting conversation. I think how you talk about ethnic studies in a place like Chico or Paradise is a really interesting conversation, but I think it's one that like I want to have, you know.
Yeah. We're in our home stretch here, but I'm conflicted because there's so many things I want to ask about. Maybe I'll try to just keep it concise.
Sure.
I'm interested in learning more about what you were talking about with bringing culture into schools and what that kind of means for white people who have gravitated towards like a generalized identity of whiteness rather than, you know, Norwegian or Irish. And that's the distinction you're making, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's like you're gravitating towards like a power title rather than towards like an actual culture, because there's such a thing like Norwegian culture is very different than right Appalachia culture or something.
And a lot of us are just mutts, and so it's hard to like find those strings, right?
And what does that look like in like a school in Chico? Yeah.
Well, I think it starts by like redefining like like, this is what I tell my kid. I'm like, you know, like, you write white on a box, but just like, you know, my niece who is half Jamaican and half white. Like, her identity isn't solely like Black. Like, she doesn't identify as a Black person. She identifies as like half Jamaican, and like her, you know, she's really into Jamaican culture. And so it's like, I just tell him the same things. It's like, you know, it was really important for me to like show him where a lot of our family comes from, like on both sides. I would love to take him there one day. And like, when we talk about foods, we talk about like, oh, this is like, you know, something that like grandma used to make, or this is something that like my, you know, grandma's mom used to make for like New Year's. And so I think so much of it, food is such an easy way to start. And I think like, you know, white people have more than tofu. Like we have like cultural food that we come from, and like we have cultural norms and practices. And I think like we always have like, even though there's like some stuff in our past that's like not okay, everyone has bad actors and their ancestors, and everyone has resistors in their ancestry. And so I think it's really important to like do that work of like finding out like your family history and the cultures that you come from and the ways that they struggled and what you can learn from that. And I think we miss a lot of that when we just like have our kids identify as white, especially now when I feel like, not that I think, you know, critical race theory or ethnic studies is pushing this at all, but I think it's hard to like not have shame sometimes. You know, I think my son said to me once, he's like, well, we're white, so like all of our ancestors are bad. And I was just like, no, like, no. And I think like, you know, maybe some people in my family, or maybe some people that are like critical of the way I think about the world, would be like, oh, that's what you want your son to think. And no, like, I don't want anyone to have shame. Like, shame is not the goal. And like, you know, whenever I have talked about race with students or power with students, it's like what you do. It's like that same conversation that I had before. Like, some of us are coming to the table with more resources. Like, can we be honest about the fact that it's like not because of how hard we work in society, and just share like we teach kids when they're 5? Like, I think it's actually pretty simple. But I think shame is really powerful, and that's why you see a lot of folks resisting to even have a conversation about it. And I think, you know, it's important that we have a conversation. It's important that we work through shame to find out on the other side is just like more understanding and more willingness to connect with others.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Cathryn, I'm grateful to have you in this community. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a guest on this show.
Yeah.
I look forward to having many more conversations with you.
Would be great.
Appreciate it.